Kia ora. Welcome, Rachel. Thank you for doing this for us. Rachel Kerr is first-time novelist, and her fantastic book, Victory Park, is being published this month. And we're here with Rachel to ask her about the writing process, largely to help people with their efforts in NaNoWriMo. So, Rachel, I'd like to ask you, do you have any writing rituals you like to follow before you start writing? Like, do you make a cup of tea, switch off the social media, that sort of thing?
Yeah, it's a point of pride for me to actually not require any kind of special practice, to be able to just write anywhere, at the kitchen table, in the garden, or you know, when I'm away on holiday, because otherwise I require those things, and there's always a good excuse for me to not do it. But there is an imaginative process that I go into quite early on in the process of writing the book. I deeply imagined the spaces of the book, the physical spaces, so that I could kind of go into them in my mind and almost method act the book from there. And that kind of acted as a memory palace that held it all together for me. And it was kind of like, you know, with archery, how they slow their breathing down so that they can take aim. That was like that. It's almost a physiological thing of putting yourself into a different space to write.
Cool, thank you.
Thank you.
Are there any best practices you follow while writing to keep you focused on what you're writing in the kind of end point?
Oh, I'm sure there are as many best practices as there are writers, but some things that were useful for me were reading my work out loud, because that just immediately identifies all kinds of awkwardnesses in expression, or problems with proportion or repetition. Other best practices. For me, it was useful to write at the outset, write a chapter outline. That sounds quite sort of awkward, and it's quite artificial at the start, but it helped me to relax and have a sense of where it was going. Also, I found it really useful to think about the overall shape of what I was doing, so that it kind of, I had a sense of where it went up and where it went down, because that also gave me the confidence to kind of relax into what I was doing and have an idea that it would develop some momentum and some release.
Is there anything in particular you do to keep yourself motivated? You know, when it starts getting difficult and you're going, oh, it's not working, you go, oh, I'll do this to kind of...
Yeah, usually I do a massive panic at that point. I think partly it's just a matter of discipline, really. It's kind of like going to work. Some days you just feel horrible and you just got to go and do it, and you just keep going. And it's perhaps useful to just bear in mind that you can do it. I think that's one of the lovely things about writing, is that there aren't entrance qualifications. It's not like being a model where you have to be 6 foot and skinny or they're sending you out. Like, you can work around your limitations. Everyone can do it. You just keep going and keep being imaginative and keep trying to make it as interesting as you can, and you will get somewhere at least, and then you can improve it from there and make it much better. The other thing that's really useful to think for me is the idea that it can always be better. Like, you might have done something you're quite happy with, but you're always only halfway to where it could always be much better.
Can you tell us a little bit about the process or processes you use to create the character and plot for Victory Park?
Sure. So, for characterisation, for me that was a very organic process. They started out quite abstract, and I just gradually kind of added, it was kind of like a forest growing, I guess, where just bits here and there kind of naturally connected on. It was quite an eclectic kind of thing. I did also immerse myself in the world of the characters, like listen to their music and spend a lot of time in the physical suburb, which I had in mind, and researched some things about their jobs, because I think the way that people earn money has quite a big impact on character.
It's interesting you mentioned research, because the next question I'd like to ask you, Rachel, is how you went about research and where you got the kind of initial inspirations, initial kind of kernel of ideas that sparked in the novel.
Yeah, so I think I did a lot of research that didn't end up in the book. Right at the outset, I read quite a bit about Ponzi schemes. And I think if I were writing another book, I would be much more focused with research, particularly about technical things, to just things that actually arise, because it's an easy way to waste time and think that you're doing something useful when you're not really. You're just, it's easy to do.
It's interesting you said that. Would there be things you would change about the processes for your next book?
Yeah, I mean, I imagine that it will be easier and that I will be confidently writing badly to write well and blocking out shapes. But I suspect it might be a little bit like a second kid, where you think you've got it worked out the first time, and I'm good at parenting now, and it might not work out like that.
Are there any general hints and tips you'd like to share with first-time writers, people who've just started in that process of becoming an author?
Yeah, maybe a couple of things. I think in terms of how you critique yourself, I think in the first draft it makes sense to go a little bit easy on yourself, because at that point you're really dragging furniture into the room, you're making scenes happen, you're blocking stuff out. Unless you're one of those writers like Faulkner who does it perfectly the first time, in which case, good on you. But if you're not, there's lots of us that aren't that, and it's just hard work to make stuff happen, and that's incredibly valuable, a first draft where you've made stuff happen. And then as you get further into it, you need to really listen to your intuition of where something could be a little bit more interesting, or where the tone's a little bit off, where you've, repeated yourself.
Can you tell us about working with a publisher? And for newbies, can you tell us a little bit about what exactly does a publisher do for you?
Sure. Well, this is my first time of that experience, but so the experience I had with Mary was kind of a continuation of what I'd done myself at first, at least, of really looking at character and plot and where those things were working. One of the things that we did was quite early on in the process with Mary was to drop 3 chapters off the end, which I think dramatically improved things. And then it was a process of, Mary identified all kinds of moments where it would be useful to have more of a reaction from a character that would just sort of lift that character up in the mix a little more. Or it was that same kind of final refining that I'd done myself, but from a slightly different angle, which kind of really just took it that last little bit.
Was it difficult finding a publisher in the first place?
I tried a couple. She was my second choice, but only because actually at the point where I sent it to her, I actually hadn't heard of Mākaro back then, because it was pre-Oi, which was obviously a phenomenon. So I got lucky really with the timing, I'd have to say.
Can you tell us a little bit more about the editing process, and perhaps go into a little bit, what does an editor actually do for an author? So I guess it's an extension of what the writer does themselves. It's a refining and making it more of a coherent whole. So Mary picked up various moments where something happens over there are sort of continuity things, but more serious than continuity things, picking up, really making it coherent in terms of what was meaningful in the whole picture. Quite obvious question, but how long did it actually take you to write Victory Park? Was it a long process, or was it fast, just when you've been...
No, I was definitely of the snail variety of writer. I started it as part of the IIML Master's course in 2013, and then tinkered with it ever since. Although there was also a delay from when it was accepted for publication in 2018 until now, when it's been able to be actually published.
kind of linked to that, and perhaps quite difficult to answer actually, how many versions or iterations did it actually go through before you kind of got to one where you go, oh, actually this is it ready for me to submit to a publisher?
It didn't actually have clear draft versions. I know some people do. They do a draft, they sign that off. They do another draft, they sign it off. I relied on Dropbox version, and while there were several run-throughs from start to finish, there's also quite a lot of just tinkering. It was a kind of a mossy-ferny kind of development rather than a clear set of stages.
So I've just got one more last question. Did you think about the e-publishing route before finding a publisher? And why did you decide to go for a publisher rather than any other kind of platform?
I think it was always a really important bar for me to get accepted by a publisher. I guess because I didn't trust my own sense of when it was finished or good enough, and I don't mean that as in a bad way at all. I really wanted that external bar. Then I knew that it was good enough, really, and also. And I'm really glad I did take that route because it's just been so useful having Mary's input and, just to bring it all together.
That's great.
And the physical thing of the actual book, I'm so happy with the way that just the printing looks really nice and it's in this nice small format.
That's brilliant. Thank you very much for that, Rachel. Victory Park, it's a great book, and
thank you.
Thanks for doing this.
Thank you so much.